Okay. Hello, everyone. Good evening, good afternoon, good morning, wherever you are on this planet. Welcome to our Weizenbaum-Forum on cybersecurity governance challenges in times of growing geopolitical tensions. My name is Volker. I head the research group Digital Economy, Internet Ecosystem, and Internet Policy at the Weizenbaum-Institut, and I have the great pleasure and honor of moderating today's discussion. Thank you all very much for joining us for today's event, and a very special thank you to Cecilia Testart for co-organizing this with me and our stellar group of panelists for being here. Thank you, folks. Now, you may ask, why did we come up with this topic in the first place? So let me walk you through some of these thoughts and give you some context. Our societies and economies have become deeply and in many ways irreversibly dependent on digital technologies, directly and indirectly, with or without awareness. A broadening variety of networkable devices is deployed across homes, workplaces, industrial environments, and almost everyone, right? And everything is always on, interconnected, and computing, and increasingly AI assisted. As these technologies become more pervasively embedded in private and also professional environments, of course, threat landscapes evolve, and cybersecurity risks at the infrastructure, device, product levels are arguably becoming harder to manage. And there are a bunch of, as economists would call, externality, asymmetric information problems at work, which, for example, Anna Maria, who is a panelist today, and I examine in detail in our joint work. So while policies to address cybersecurity and resilience have emerged, we see geopolitical tensions that complicate a harmonized path forward. Now, let me briefly walk you through the landscape. Now, behind platforms, networks, devices, I just mentioned, right, and more broadly behind service provision in today's digital economy, lies a complex and evolving fabric of interconnected and complementary resources. Network computing, from hyperscale data centers to edge locations, communications networks from fiber and 5G to submarine sea cables, software, which includes all kinds of machine learning, AI-related stuff, and data of all kinds. Now, these resources are organized into overlapping multi-layered stacks. Many of you have heard the term AI stack, and also probably how these stacks are controlled by large tech companies. Now, make no mistake, we have witnessed over the last 2 decades or so a seismic shift in the way the internet is interconnected, where servers are positioned, data is stored and processed, and how and from where content and application services are distributed and delivered. Think on-premise, think edge, think cloud, all kinds of stuff. Well, before the recent hype around AI, leading tech firms were building highly scalable, extensible infrastructure substrates that underpin a growing share of economic activity. Now here, again, more recently, AI has driven massive investments in these stacks. And if you include to the picture stuff like softwarization and modularization, we see expanding options for seamlessly combining these resources. Now, the result is that value chains are becoming more fluid, ownership and control structures are changing, and competitive dynamics are being redrawn. Now, here's a critical point for our discussion today. These AI-driven ecosystems are characterized by a fabric, a complex and evolving fabric of technical and business relationships, and a variety of dependencies and interdependencies that are often opaque and poorly understood, even by the stakeholders involved. Now, add to this that the underlying resources are owned and managed by different, very often competing entities with imperfectly aligned incentives and varying capabilities to secure them, report incidents, and collaborate. And you begin to see, I guess, why the security landscape and the cybersecurity threat models are growing ever more complex. Now, the consequences are tangible. You probably have heard of outages at major cloud platforms that have shown how a single point of failure can cascade across entire sectors. So dependencies can give rise to more systemic risks or harm. Now, the deepening interdependencies between compute data and AI model supply chains, for example, now in the case of AI models, combined with growing geopolitical tensions, heightens concerns around cybersecurity, resilience, and digital sovereignty. Now let's shift gears a bit and look at networks. At the network level, Core internet protocols, such as the Border Gateway Protocol, BGP, were not originally designed with security in mind, leaving them susceptible to misconfigurations, deliberate attacks, such as route hijacking. While the resource public key infrastructure, RPKI, for example, offers a cryptographic framework to address some of these vulnerabilities, adoption remains a challenge. I'm sure that we will hear more about this from Cecilia later. Now, this is also, this kind of network vulnerabilities and resilience, if I may add, is also an area where Cecilia and I, along with David Clark and Bill Leary, have explored the internet resilience topic in a joint paper 2 years ago. Now, when we switch focus to the device level and product level, we see an explosive growth of the Internet of Things, the IoT, which has introduced billions of connected products into homes and workplaces, many lacking basic security features. Now, when you think about the security context, traditional perimeter-based security models are increasingly invalid here. A compromised IoT device can act as an internal adversary, enabling lateral movement within a network, replay attacks, long-term surveillance, and so on. Risks especially pronounced in consumer environments without professional security oversight. Now, AI and large language models and so on are now being integrated directly into these devices, while many routinely communicate with servers across multiple jurisdictions in ways often opaque to users and regulators. We have seen that in the EU, the Cyber Resilience Act represents an important policy effort to address some of these issues. And here, of course, I think Anna Maria will talk a bit about this later, and we have also current research collaborations on these topics. Now, having briefly mapped and walked you through this landscape, let me turn to two forces, like cross-cutting forces, that further complicate the picture. I will come back to AI itself. So AI is in a way a double-edged sword. While it can enhance threat detection and cyber defense, it may also be leveraged to launch more sophisticated attacks and identify vulnerabilities at unprecedented speed and scale. AI is also becoming deeply embedded in network operations, from traffic management to automated routing decisions, raising questions of whether this enhances resilience or introduces new risks. As of now, it seems far from clear whether jurisdictions are converging or diverging in how they approach these challenges. Second is geopolitics. I mentioned this before. Coordinated international responses are becoming increasingly difficult precisely when they seem most needed. The EU, for example, finds itself navigating aspirations for strategic autonomy and the realities of a deeply interconnected global digital economy. Questions of how to balance sovereignty, competitiveness, cybersecurity require addressing complex trade-offs. Now, these dynamics and complexities bring us to the questions that will guide our discussion today, and I should note that they run in both directions. On the one hand, where do cybersecurity challenges touch on geopolitical and sovereignty concerns? How is the integration of AI into devices, networks, and critical systems changing the threat landscape? Are we seeing fundamentally new attack surfaces or an amplification of existing problems? And what should governments care most about when it comes to centralized control, dependencies, and systemic risks? On the other hand, where do geopolitical and sovereignty dynamics reshape technical cybersecurity questions? How are governments recalibrating the trade-offs between openness, efficiency, and security? Now, and what are the implications of cross-border data flows and concentrated control over critical infrastructure for the enforceability of regulation? Now, these are huge challenges, and we couldn't be more fortunate, right, to have a truly outstanding and interdisciplinary panel with us today here, bringing together expertise from diverse geographic and institutional contexts. We start with Alexia González Fanfalone. She's the head of the Connectivity Services and Infrastructure Unit at the OECD's Directorate for Science, Technology, and Innovation. With over a decade of experience in digital policy and communications regulations, Alexia leads the OECD's work on connectivity and infrastructure policy and has authored numerous, I think more than 20 publications on digital transformation. She brings a uniquely international perspective on the multilateral governance dimension. And so we start with Alexia. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Volker. This is a great honor to be invited to this prestigious panel with such world experts on cybersecurity. So I come from the OECD, and we have 38 member countries. our unit that is focused on digital infrastructure and communication policy and regulation covers all the different aspects of communication networks and the implications for policy. And we have done work on this, how to secure communication networks, but also on enhancing the resilience of communication networks. And today, I just want to give a broad overview of some of our work on this area. First, mentioning that communication networks and connectivity in general is the foundation for digital transformation. And given their crucial role, their security and resilience have become really key priorities worldwide for policymakers, but in particular across the OECD. And this is important because, as Volker mentioned, their reliance and their reliability and their security helps us ensure the well-functioning of our digitally dependent economies and societies. And it helps strengthen the trust on the ongoing digital transformation. So let me just go through some slides that I prepared today. Trying to get to the next slide. Sorry. There's critical applications across multiple sectors, and there's transformative digital technologies mentioned by Volker, like IoT and AI and immersive tech as well. And this is placing huge demands on networks, and networks have been evolving to meet these massive amounts of data that are transmitted over them, to have higher bandwidth, lower latency, increased coverage, and ultra or high reliability. And this has taken us to trends that are shaping networks in general, but in particular, and on how it's affecting the digital security of communication networks. And if we look at the main trends that the first one is the increasing criticality and reliance on communication networks by the economy and society as a whole, which is really changing and in the context of the digital security of networks, but also in the global context that geopolitical situation across the world. We see as well a growing virtualization of networks and a more important use of cloud integration into networks. There's new forms of network slicing as well, and the use of AI within the networks. We also see a shift towards the openness of networks, which included previous discussions of how to diversify the supply chain of network equipment, as well as the growing integration of terrestrial and non-terrestrial connectivity solutions. There's an evolution of technology standards, for example, 5G, 6G, etc. And all of these technological trends and overarching trends are impacting security of networks. Now, this prompts what are the questions on what are the main implications for it in terms of security. So there's cross-cutting security implications that bring both benefits and potential challenges. On the one hand, these trends benefit the cybersecurity in terms of security risk management of communication infrastructure. They can help improve the network visibility, the network management, the segmentation and isolation of incidents, allocate security resources more effectively, automate early detection of malware and malicious activity, increase transparency and reduce dependencies on certain suppliers or any other potential benefits that might breach digital security. So as we look into, for example, the trend of openness of networks. But we also see that there are some challenges to this, to digital security risk management and communication networks. For example, an expanding attack surface, which is the set of points of information in an information system that are potentially vulnerable to an attack. And since the architecture of communication networks is increasingly more complex, and because networks are becoming software-defined, cloud-based, and virtualized, and with new partnerships being engaged, for example, integration of cloud into networks, there's new partnerships, different actors. All of this contains more software vulnerabilities that can be exploited. A second implication in terms of the challenges is there is a broader and more complex supply chain. And some of the technological advancements that are outlined in these trends that I mentioned tend to increase the dependency of network operators, their suppliers. They redistribute, for example, the control and responsibility of the management of cybersecurity along the supply chain. And all of this leads us to an aggravating, potentially aggravating attack threat landscape, which is the third implication, right? Which is driven in part by the commoditization of attacks and also the increasing sophistication of state-sponsored and other threat actors. So against all these backdrop of multiple potential malicious actors and their motivation, it's important to keep in mind that these potential benefits and potential challenges of these trends make governments face a paradox. And the paradox is the following, that while communication networks are increasingly considered critical infrastructure for the well-functioning of the economies, their digital security ultimately depends upon decision made by third parties, namely network operators and their suppliers, and the supply chain is global and interconnected, right? Nevertheless, governments do have a clear role to play to incentivize the adoption of cybersecurity best practices and to support an enabling environment that empowers stakeholders to reach this optimal level of cybersecurity. And this can be fostered through the following objectives, which hopefully, which would be first, adopting a holistic and strategic approach to enhance cybersecurity of communication infrastructure, for example, and considering the entire life cycle of products and services on which operators rely, including terminal devices, which was mentioned, for example, with IoT terminal devices. Secondly, to gather all relevant stakeholders and to coordinate, and thirdly, to coordinate across the whole government at the international level. So this coordination that's across governmental agencies, but also international coordination is important to define the clear responsibilities, mandates, and information sharing, which in this context sometimes can be a huge challenge. Secondly, is to incentivize operators to enhance their cybersecurity by adopting a comprehensive risk management framework. For example, encouraging them to explore advanced security approaches such as zero trust model, security by design, and all the elements of the supply chain of communication networks. And thirdly, to address supply chain cybersecurity risk by incentivizing suppliers that improve the transparency of the supply chain. For example, enhanced traceabilities, and here those trends such as AI that we're mentioning can help and to know where these components are going and trace them up, but also supporting diversification and within the ICT sector and their supply chains. So all these three objectives can help structure policy intervention. So I come representing OECD countries, so I'm giving you the public sector perspective to improve the cybersecurity of communication infrastructure. And there's several policy actions, more like punctual policy actions that address these cost-cutting trends, and such as voluntary frameworks and guidance, multi-stakeholder initiatives, and funding research, like the research Volker, Cecilia are doing, Anna are doing, third-party evaluation and certification, public procurement, legal requirements, and different legislation that we've seen in several OECD countries, and in particular, the latest revised, for example, you mentioned the Cybersecurity Act. This impacts 22 over 38 OECD countries. And these actions can be shaped carefully to address these cross-cutting issues in terms of scope, in terms of scale, and in terms of the speed of these cyber attacks, right? Because you have to be responsive when these happen. And so with this, I will say that OECD countries are these challenges are across the world, and OECD countries are doing their best to try to address them when it comes to communication networks. And I'm really eager to learn from the other speakers on their perspectives from the research community on how to enhance cyber security of communication networks, but of other parts of the supply chain, of the connectivity ecosystem as a whole. Thank you very much.